My name is Peter Rollins, and along with our President, Father Leahy, and our Chancellor, Father Monin, I welcome you to the Chief Executives Club of Boston. We're always pleased to have the media here, but if I seem more nervous than usual, it's because Bloomberg is videoing the event, and I'm into my third week of Slim Fast. Can you tell? Once again, we are fortunate to have a who's who in attendance. From the public sector, I would like to acknowledge the Executive Director of the State Lottery Commission and now a horse racing guru, Joe Sullivan. Joe? The Executive Director of the Mass Convention Center, Jim Rooney. Jim? The Majority Leader of the Massachusetts House of Representatives and a man on the rise, John Rogers. John. And our increasingly visible State Treasurer, Tim Cahill. Tim. From the private sector, the owner and publisher of the Boston Herald, who I know will be here for years to come, Pat Purcell. And finally, a man who we honored at last week's Boston College Citizens Seminar with our Lifetime Achievement Award, known as the go-to guy, a former head of the powerful Vault and the former CEO of Bank Boston, business icon Richard Hill. There are 6 more organizations that have joined with us since we met in March. Altran North America, Andrews Computer Systems, Au Bon Pain, Boston Residential Group, Insight Executive Coaching, and Lane Berry International. Welcome to the Chief Executives Club of Boston. If you haven't joined yet and want to avoid our pending waiting list, I urge you to pick up one of our brochures in the foyer as you depart. We will next gather here on May 10th when Leahy Clinic's David Barrett will host Manulife CEO Dominic D'Alessandro, his first major address since acquiring John Hancock. Other confirmed speakers include Eastman Kodak CEO Dan Karp, who will be hosted by partners Jim Mongden, and Verizon CEO Ivan Seidenberg, who will be hosted by Bank of America's Ann Finucane. Additional confirmed speakers include United Technologies' George David, the former president of CBS, and now the president of EDS, Michael Jordan, and Amgen's Kevin Scherer. I see Guzzy writing all these names down. We also have, as many of you know, some significant surprises ahead. I've been talking about that so long. They are coming. Having said that, let me now thank one of our region's top business leaders, Raytheon's Bill Swanson, for hosting today's events. It's a singular event, and invite him to the podium to introduce our keynote speaker. Bill, come forward. Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much. I'm sorry the mayor and the speaker couldn't be with us today. We've got one of those Chamber of Commerce days, and so happy that Gary could join us. Before I start my introduction, I would like to recognize one individual. I know he's here, Tom Phillips. Tom? Tom was chairman and CEO for Raytheon for 22 years, and I'm happy to say one of my mentors, and really instilled ethics and integrity in our company, which is so important today. Tom, I thank you for that. The last time I stood in front of the Chief Executives Club, I had the honor of introducing Ron Sugar, who was a leader in the defense industry last June. Now I have the privilege of introducing a great leader in the telecommunications industry. Gary Forsee lives, eats, and breathes telecom. He's been in the industry for more than 30 years. He's served in leadership positions at AT&T, Southwestern Bell, Bell South, and now Sprint. He became CEO in March of '03 and chairman of the board that same May, and I'm proud to say that I'm a member of that board. In short order, he's transformed Sprint's operational structure to what I call a customer-centric model. And he's announced the recent merger, historic merger, with Nextel. At the time of the announcement in December, Sprint and Nextel served 35 million wireless subscribers on their networks and 5 million additional subscribers through affiliates and their partners. It's no wonder that Gary's been designated the Chief Executive Officer of the Sprint Nextel company when that merger closes. Now, most of this and all that information you can find in his bio, including his work on the President's National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee, where his contributions are valued. But what I thought I should do is give you a little different idea of what Gary's all about than what's in his bio. And Gary, this is painless, I promise. And what I wanted you all to know about is his tremendous commitment to inclusiveness in the workplace. And it's really no surprise then that Sprint was just recognized by Hispanic Trends magazine as one of the top 50 corporations for supplier diversity, or that the U.S. Black Engineers in Information Technology magazine has selected 2 Sprint top executives out of the 50 most important blacks in technology lists for 2005. Clearly, Gary values inclusiveness and what it means to Sprint. In today's corporate world, Gary's values were learned at home, in church, as a Boy Scout, and in his business career. He believes every company and organization is a reflection of its leader. To quote Gary, "There is a long shadow you cast every day with your actions and your words." Would you please join me in welcoming the leader who was recognized by Businessweek magazine as one of the best 19 managers of 2004, a gentleman who casts a long shadow. Gary.
Thank you, Bill, for that too kind introduction. And I got to tell you what a thrill it is to have Bill Swanson on our board of directors. He has brought a tremendous amount of knowledge and a wealth of experience to our company, and we're certainly grateful for what you contribute. Peter, thank you for your words as well, and thank you for the introduction, and also to all the members of the Chief Executives Club for inviting me to be here with you today. I would say, though, if you would have delayed this a week, I think that would have timed with the Red Sox-Yankees, so that would have been a good opportunity for the home opener. You know, in Kansas City, we play fantasy sports year-round with the Royals and the Chiefs, so we're always kind of in the aspirational phase. But I think I'd be remiss without recognizing what this city accomplished last year between the convention and with 2 world champions. That's probably one of those Hall of Fame years, but I'm sure the excitement kind of still spills over. And again, congratulations to the city of Boston for an incredible year from a lot of perspectives, including what goes on in the business community. I should also acknowledge I do have my Boston College gold on today, and the father assured me that would be worth a few points sometime in the future, perhaps. You know, I think as I started off with a sports analogy about hope, including the Kansas City sports scene, I think there is more than just hope for the topic that I'm going to talk about for a few minutes this afternoon, which is convergence revolution that's going on in telecommunications, and really staying real with the promise of that in the virtual world and try to connecting the two topics. last week, I think there was really a suggestion about that in the New York Times, which said it's not just a phone, it's an adventure. With overstuffed handsets baffling consumers, there is a need for a simpler approach. So I'll try to tie back into that with my comments. You know, I think as I reflect on it, communication really is integral in all parts of everyday lifestyle. So whether we're at work, whether we're at home, or whether we're on the go, customers today want an integrated experience, one that promises access to voice and data anytime, anywhere, seamlessly between those different places where we operate, again, at home, in the office, or everywhere in between. And already, even in today's environment where it's not perfectly connected, we can do some pretty remarkable things. For example, a user in Los Angeles can contact Google over his or her cell phone for the name of a good pizza place nearby and gets an answer seconds later. A beverage distributor receives a text message over its wireless system that the delivery that was ordered by a restaurant has reached its destination by a simple chipset that's attached to the cases that are shipped with the product. Insurance adjusters use their digital phones to document hurricane-damaged homes in Florida and wirelessly transmit the data and photos to home offices for claims adjustments. These and millions of other daily uses of new telecommunications devices and media are changing the way that we live and the way we work. After a century of telecommunications dominated by the traditional fixed-line companies, the Bell operating companies, if you will, we now find ourselves in a world where technology, competition, and customer demand are erasing those boundaries and forcing virtually every company, not just in our industry, but on areas around, including in this room, every company to reassess their business model as a result of that. So whether it's carried by wireless, by cable, by satellite, or even electric power lines, communication services are converging in ways that promise revolutionary improvements in capabilities and also, importantly, in cost. I know that Michael Capellas was here last fall and I think gave you a complete education on voice over IP, voice over the internet. And you know, that probably was recently used only by a few in the room, or maybe even only by computer geeks, but now you can rapidly see that transferring to the mass market and just watch TV at night if you don't understand the importance of that particular technology. It's a future that was foreseen by Alfred Lord Tennyson, who wrote in 1842 that dipped into the future and saw the heavens filled with commerce. But I don't think even he could have imagined that the chatter of some 2 billion wireless devices worldwide now, 180 million in this country, when only a few years ago that wireless device was probably more attuned to the size of a shoebox or a shoe, and that's just one mode of communication that we see in this evolution. But to borrow an old phrase, we need to be sure that we leap and do that very carefully before we totally embrace this power of convergence in this future. None of us wants to repeat the overinflated dot-com bubble of the last decade. I had a conversation with a few of you about that before we started lunch, when companies literally burned through billions of dollars of investors' cash, of promises made and certainly not entirely kept during that time of overhype and certainly under delivery. At one point in time, there were 18 nationwide fiber optic networks under construction in this country, when in reality, literally 2 or 3 or 4 of those networks can handle most of that traffic as far as you or I could see into the future. So when I say that there's a subtitle to what I'm talking about, staying real in this virtual world, that's the reference point that I make. So with that caution as our seatmate, let me dive into this topic of convergence and the revolution that goes along with that. And to be sure that we're on the same page, let me provide a simple definition that describes convergence. It really is bringing together wireless, wireline, whether it's a mobile device or device that tethers to your computer. It's bringing together video, music, instant messaging, email, data files that you can transmit, and really much more digital photos. Who would have thought that in the course of the last 2 years we would now spend more time sending pictures by our cell phones? And last night, Bill and I happened to be not together but at the Final Four in St. Louis, and it was fascinating watching video clips being taken by cell phones and transmitting, and pictures being taken by cell phones being transmitting as really, I think, kind of the preferred way that users were sharing that experience last night. So all of these internet-based technologies and networks use a wide range of devices and technology, and again, that has to be something that we all get comfortable with as users, but it does allow customers to have the same user experience across all those mediums, across all those platforms. And let me give you just a couple of examples of that. A few years ago, PDAs, personal digital assistants, were ways that we kept track of phone numbers, right? Addresses and appointments that were able to be kept and brought up by that device. Now they have the speed, the storage capacity, and wireless access to do everything from making phone calls to taking digital pictures, downloading and reading spreadsheets, and viewing digital media clips all at the same time on the same device. Where wireless phones were the size of a size 12 shoe in 1990 when handy only for making phone calls, today they can do everything that those PDAs can do, including accessing music videos, and if you're in Japan, handling four-way video conferencing, downloading cash onto the phone, swiping it over the scanner, and then at the local mini-mart being sure that you can pay for your groceries in that fashion. So this is not future stuff. This is occurring around the world, and a lot of those applications are quickly coming into the U.S. Let me now talk about cable. Once a very passive service simply for providing telephone shows at home, and you remember the promise of 500 stations, which seemed like a far-off event. Now cable operators such as Time Warner Cable are seeking partners like Sprint to help them complete what they call the quadruple play, where they bring together video, broadband access or the internet, basic telephony services, voice over IP coming across the cable lines, and services that are all brought together into what is defined as a new bundle in the home, again, to make those services simpler and easier to use. But the real magic occurs when that system and that process becomes seamless to the user, where you don't have to access each of those services, each of those technologies with different passwords. And let's not leave out the plain old electric power lines. After years of research, power companies are now poised to take advantage of their infrastructure by providing both commercial and residential service and broadband over their power lines. And again, I'm sure some of you have seen or heard about that. And that's also transferring actually into the commercial practice as well, where everything in a building could be handled over the power line. So again, who would have thought the technology could have come together in that kind of fashion? Our customers, we see, are moving more and more to wireless and email substitution. They're demanding more wireless data applications such as internet access, gaming, and video streaming. Today, about 40% of the calls that are made that used to be considered long-distance calls, remember those days, are now made over wireless calls. And so this notion of a long-distance call has quickly been replaced by any distance in a lot of cases, which is not a term that I like to necessarily think about, but a lot of cases it's free because you're calling on net, and those are certainly advantages that, that take place in this marketplace. We estimate today that about 8% of our users on the Sprint network have actually cut the cord and no longer are tethered in the home. In some cases may have a broadband access from the cable company or from the telephone company, but then also use a wireless device as their primary means of communication. So those of us that have children that are in that up and coming generation, I know my daughter in graduate school has a cable modem and has a wireless phone. And think about the kids that are now in junior high and how they're coming along, where they think about that world of being fixed in the home or wireless, and I think you know where that particular type of trend will go. But it doesn't just apply to consumers, and I think what's happening, and just even in our lunch discussion, what used to take place in technology was business applications would start and move into consumer space over time. In some cases, in wireless in particular, it's moving from consumer toward business because the reliability that business customers have needed heretofore hasn't been necessarily in place in wireless network. But that's changing very quickly because we know in companies like ours that the standard, if you're used to it working 100 and +% of the time, if you will, when it's working in your office or working at home, then the standard will be that same issue has to apply as it comes across to wireless. And again, those issues are taking place, and the ability for companies to make that transition to kind of unsnarl what goes on when you move someone in an office building will certainly be a key enabling activity. But I also hasten to say that, with this rapid growth, yours truly, and I'm sure many of you in this room, when I go into a Best Buy or CompUSA and I see the hundreds of technology devices, it's pretty easy to get baffled. How does all that work? Yet you see the lines stacked up in the stores and users that are certainly clamoring to take advantage of the gadgets and the services that go along with that. So I think I would call that, the so-called sexy stuff, if you will, the entertainment that gets delivered over those products and services. But when you really get past that glitz, I think there's really a lot more important issues going on to the economic futures around applications of convergence to businesses, to government customers, to emerging markets around the world that really are able to leapfrog heretofore very expensive wired networks. And talking about Beijing again at lunch, how emerging countries and markets are really bypassing what took us hundreds of years to develop, if you will, those fixed networks and moving to the next generation technology. So as we think about that, again, back to speakers I know that we've talked with you before, the emergence of this voice over IP and making that work around wireless is really, a very important activity. And what used to be 4 separate networks, a voice network, a data network, those networks that worked in an office for external calls, an internal phone system, and you can think about the challenges that we've all had when we want to move someone floor to floor or a block away. It required simply kind of re-engineering every part of the operation and lots of labor-intensive activities that go along with that. So for enterprise customers, now the environment with voice over IP, it's simply kind of a plug and play. It's a software change that occurs, and that user device can go floor to floor, go to another part of the campus, go to another part of town, and work seamlessly across the internet. And the same, by the way, occurs with wireless devices, and guess what? It's the same voice mailbox, and it's the same passwords that go along with that. For example, earlier this year, Sprint displaced the entire product development team within the Ford Motor Company that were using fixed line services and replaced those with wireless devices that also had a ReadyLink, which is our version of push-to-talk. So those product development resources are no longer tied to one spot. They can seamlessly move across their factories for product development activities and, in fact, move across the country in that kind of environment. So rapid technology advancements, increased competition from new entrants, heightened customer demand and expectation, and the need for this anytime, anywhere information is really the backbone of this convergence revolution. But like any revolution, telecom convergence has been, in some cases, thoroughly disruptive, in the sense described a few years ago by Clayton Christensen in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma. And when you think about a recent article in the New York Times which talked about how this technology sometimes can get a little bit too close to home, our troops in Iraq, because of the various communication tools like internet and cell phones that enable real-time communications for virtually every soldier, Marine, airman, sailor deployed, the capability has certainly undoubtedly helped our military operations and the field generals that are in control of those particular logistics. But also the emotional and the psychological impact on those soldiers and their families is yet unclear. So today's technology, as that article described, has the potential to immerse families that heretofore would have been connected by letters or by that occasional phone call, are now able to be connected literally daily by the internet and by wireless, and all of a sudden immersing those soldiers in some of the domestic problems that occur back home and their families and the tense aspects of what's going on with their critical missions. So on balance, likely a positive thing, but certainly one of those things that we have to understand at the human level just what can occur. So this is just one example of the disruptive technologies that telecommunications convergence has really brought to our society that certainly is unfolding as we speak. And these are not just tools for doing the same thing. They're really redefining the way that we have relationships with our customers by creating new expectations. Again, the bar is being raised about that wireless expectation. It used to be okay to have a call drop from Boston to go out to the Cape. Not so anymore. You want that to work seamlessly, and you want it to work not just on voice, by the way, but if you happen to have your laptop in the back seat, to be sure that it can work in that fashion as well. So again, those expectation and that bar has been raised. So having said all this about the rise of convergence, there remain realities of what customers want to do with these technologies, and frankly what they're willing to pay for, and how companies like Sprint can grow revenues providing them. And I think there really are some special challenges that we see coming about for the next few years. So let me start with this need that we have to tame these technologies, to make them truly useful with the least amount of effort by all of us as consumers. So the downside of proliferating technologies is complexity, kind of like the Swiss Army knife, the article I just showed from the New York Times last week, that can leave all of us as customers frustrated, and sometimes the so-called plug and play really doesn't play out that way. It really is a lot more complicated as a result, and we shouldn't need engineers that keep adding new features without providing us a way of making that simpler and easier for us to use in the context. Customers want security, so we install password systems that require employees to remember multiple passwords. How many of you in this room have 2, 3, or 4, or 5? And I've now run out of old addresses and old phone numbers. This even for a guy that's moved around 15 or 16 times like I have. I now have kind of run my course of numbers that are easy to remember. And it's probably also an indication of why most of us still have fax machines around, right? Kind of that backup or fail-safe just in case we need that. And old technology sometimes it just really refuses to die. So from confusing keypads and unhelpful user manuals to incompatible software, even sophisticated users sometimes are ready to give up, and sometimes people just want to make a basic, simple phone call. and want to have that, be able to understand that's the case when they go into a retail store to do that. The psychologist Barry Schwartz wrote last year in The Paradox of Choice that proliferation of choices for consumers, quote, no longer liberates, but sometimes even debilitates. And that might even be said to tyrannize. So this is something that I think our industry needs and needs to understand that it has to overcome for what we talk about every day very lightly in terms of technology change and convergence, for that to really kick into that next gear. And I think we have to be sure that we do innovation, not just for innovation's sake, but also innovation that's useful for both consumers and business customers. Not only be sure that we have devices and services, but we make those services that are easier for customers to use. Another challenge for telecom partners in particular is to be sure that we find the right partners. And I learned long ago that no company can do it all, and to be sure that we don't hold back by the not invented here syndrome, that we find ways of providing the best products and services. Let me kind of give you an example of that, one that Sprint kind of passed on a couple years ago, but kind of hurried up and got back. One of our strengths is, historically as a company, has been our willingness to partner. But when the BlackBerry device came out several years ago, Sprint said, we can do that better on our own network, creating our own mobile email system. And guess what? The world moved very quickly, and probably most of you in this room have one of those devices, pretty handy. So we did know what was happening, saw that occurring in the marketplace, and last year got our network and the BlackBerry devices synced up. And now our customers that have the chance to make that choice can do that. But it took us, to get over that paradigm of there were other ways of doing it besides just having that own model. I think another example has been the response that occurred to the Napster threat in the music industry. I think the industry fought long and hard to be sure that the copyrighted music, with lawsuits, could keep every pirate from having access to that and sharing that. But for every pirate that was shut down, there were what, 2 or 3 that were popping up to take full advantage of that. So then the online subscription services, came available, but those were high priced and limited to, few choices, which is not what customers wanted. So customers at some point in time said, this is enough, and stopped buying. So it really wasn't until Apple launched its iPad that practically forced the music companies to partner, that downloaded music now became something that, is part and parcel, and the business model now has been very successful for everyone, including cell phone companies like ours, as a result of that. The third and one of our most immediate challenges is to be sure that the regulatory process is keeping up with the technology changes. And again, for some of you in this room and your own industries, we know that can be a challenge for the regulatory processes to catch up when the change is going on so dramatically. And we have to have, frankly, a structure that is technology neutral. And in some cases in the past, the regulation has favored one segment or another, favored fixed lines versus cable versus wireless. But for us to succeed in having deployment, broadly based across this country, we really need to be sure that we have a level playing field for that to develop. So, for example, today, in my view, state and federal telecom regulations have effectively limited affordable broadband choices. Not the fact that there isn't a broadband service available, but choice is really what the point is. In many communities, including those in Massachusetts, which help account for the slow spread of high-speed internet service in this country. And you look at our high-speed access that we have in this country and the penetration versus even emerging markets around the world like Korea, Japan, and so forth, we're behind where we should be, and the opportunity we have with the right federal policies to catch up with that. So if we do that, I think this country can continue to prosper using technology and using that in the right way. We also have to grapple with some arcane issues that have been around for 100 years or so, and our goal of providing the same local service at the same low cost to users, whether it's in an urban setting, a rural setting, or a suburban setting, even though the cost may be dramatically different associated with that. And this is something that, as the telecom industry has really exploded on a piecemeal basis, we have to be sure we can now bring that together in a logical way and get rid of some of the arcane rules around inter-carrier compensation that have inconsistencies built into those. So addressing just a few of these regulatory points is something that the new FCC Commission will have to take on. It's something that the Congress is looking at, and certainly something that industry itself has to step up to and not just wait necessarily for the perfect answer to come across a transom from what's going on. So I'd like to finally address what I think is something that you probably some days get tired of reading about, is the constant change that's going on in the telecommunication landscape. And I know you have had in the past year Mike Capellas, Dave Dorman, Ed Whitaker. I know you're going to have Ivan come back to you. Brian Roberts has been in front of you, so some of you may be becoming experts about this business, so we should stay on our toes. But suffice to say, we are going through dramatic change, and if you were to ask me, 6 months ago, what the prospects of consolidation were, that was certainly before Sprint and Nextel had decided to move forward. But when we announced our move in December, and within a 6-week period of time, AT&T being purchased by SBC, certainly MCI is still being courted by a couple of players, Alltel and Western Wireless. All of a sudden, 4 very large mergers that are occurring and changing the landscape of communications as a result of that. And my take is, frankly, that will be for the better as that occurs. Our merger with Nextel really is one that's about growth. These were 2 companies, knock on wood, that neither of us were in the ditch at that point in time. These are 2 companies that were performing and performing better. But we had the opportunity to kind of look around the corner into the future, saw the world as being more wireless-centric, saw the world being, in our case in telecom, about scale and scope, and saw the opportunity to create a company that really would stand for growth, and that's what we have decided to do. So we will be considered at that point one of 3 large wireless carriers as opposed to a distant number 3 or perhaps some other characterization. We'll have about 41 million customers on our network collectively between retail and wholesale when we close our merger, hopefully in the late summer. But I think most importantly, what we saw the opportunity to do was to provide more choice for our customers, to bring the capabilities of Sprint, of innovation and high-speed data networks for wireless to the Nextel customers, to bring the Nextel customer base onto our network with the push-to-talk, the walkie-talk feature that's been so important, but also to keep in the Sprint portfolio at that point in time a global IP network. So for customers that require both the fixed networks to work around the world and the wireless networks that will, again, stay consistent with this topic of convergence, that will be the strategy and the vision in the new future. About 80% of our revenues at that point will come from wireless. Wireless really is one of the few spaces in telecom today that are growing on the top line. So we're keeping wireless and we're keeping IP, again, another growth vector. We're going to spin out our local business. Sprint historically has been in local, long distance, and wireless. We're going to spin out our local business, which looks like, a local telephone company in 18 states, and we're the largest non-RBOC. But as we do that, that in and of itself will be a Fortune 300 company as we spin out our local access business, which will have a market cap in the $15 to $20 billion range. So we did that in order to clarify our strategy. We want to be sure that as we created Sprint Nextel, that we would be considered a company that would be a competitive alternative. So we have been working with alternative providers like the cable companies to enable them to get into heretofore businesses that would have been thought of as telephone company businesses. And I think as we do that, again, we're going to have the chance to create hopefully a lot of value for our shareholders and for our customers. We'll certainly go through the inevitable cost savings by eliminating duplication, but again, our story has been about growth, and our story is about networks as opposed to simply cutting heads, which I think makes us a very distinctive merger in the context of what's going on in today's marketplace. This will also be about table stakes, and as Tim Donahue, my counterpart at Nextel, fundamentally believe that in communications, table stakes has to be best network quality, which I'm sure many of you would applaud on top of the table or under the table in terms of where we need to go as an industry, and also about best customer service, and that's something that we're entirely committed to. And our service strategy will be both for consumers as well as for individuals and business customers around the world, and making those networks work in a way that will be most important. I also made a comment at our lunch table that as Sprint today is deploying what we consider our 3rd generation data network, which will give speeds not like you would get necessarily at your office or on the desktop at home tied down to a network, but as we do that, we're contemplating deploying our 4th generation network, which will be a wireless broadband network and portable or fixed, kind of to be determined based on the users, but a very exciting period of time. And again, you see how fast these issues are propelling themselves, and certainly something that we intend to take full advantage for in the future. So, in conclusion, and I know those are usually 2 magic and appreciated words, I want to be sure that my tone is left with you that I do understand as someone that's been in the industry a long time, as Bill said, that we do have to strike this balance around technology for technology's sake, innovation for innovation's sake, versus making that work and making that work in ways that make you as consumers and you as business users much more effective as you do that. So for companies like mine, this is really an incredibly exciting time. I think with Nextel, Sprint has found the right partner. at the right time, and certainly as we complete our merger late this year, we think we will be a company well-positioned. We have to continue to execute and take advantage of things that have been important to both of us in the past, but something that we're incredibly excited about doing. And obviously, we think our prospects as a result of that will position us well. Time will tell, but with the opportunities we have with technology, and I think with the mindset that's occurring now between content, technology working together to be more effective, I think that's a promise that I'd like to leave you with as a good place that we can collectively hope to be in the next couple of years. So I'd like to thank you, and I'll be glad to take a few questions, and I'm sure there's a timekeeper in the back that will tell us when we've overstayed our welcome. Questions? Yes, please.
Yes, hello. I have a question about integration, specifically with the Nextel context. I think my impression is Sprint is very much a consumer-oriented company, and a lot of your products are constructed with sort of common off-the-shelf components, whereas Nextel are very much in the heavy custom build and integration space with the business market in mind. And I'm interested in your perspective on how you are going to integrate those two quite diverse engineering departments and either form one or to have those two separate competencies side by side.
Yeah, one of the things we spent a lot of time on last year as we were contemplating our merger was kind of just your point. The cultures of the two companies have been coming on the wireless opportunities really from two different aspects. Sprint, started, its wireless business in 1995 and started, with a blank sheet of paper and built that from the ground up with now 20+ million customers on our network. And as I mentioned earlier, more consumer-oriented because at that point in time, for business customers, wireless was really something that was a corporate purchase umbrella for a discount versus a real business tool and business application. Nextel had taken a different approach, and certainly they really, for business customers, particularly for small, medium customers that have applications, you're all well aware of what those are as I am, whether it's the construction worker or applications in a warehousing environment where they can now transmit to inventory. A lot of applications have been developed off the Nextel platform using that push-to-talk walkie-talkie capability. But Sprint, as you may also know, has had a long-distance network. And that business over time has now moved more and more from our perspective into the enterprise where we need to sell solutions for business customers and to come in and take advantage of how wireless and these traditional long-distance fixed networks are coming together was a strategy that Sprint looked at 2 years ago. And Bill mentioned we transformed our company in 2004, moved away from two tracking stocks. We had a stock that tracked our wireless business and a stock that tracked our traditional fixed line business. Moved that back together last year because customers were starting to move their buying behaviors together around this notion of convergence. So our strategy with Nextel is to be able to bring their business capability into context with what Sprint has historically had more on the long distance side so that those solutions and the application of Nextel can work together. At the same time, Nextel is going to get the benefit of the innovation that Sprint had on wireless data more oriented toward consumers to bring that into the space associated with their business model of push-to-talk. So in about a 2-year period, the Nextel network will be able to migrate fully onto the Sprint network for these next generation services. And as we do that, their users all of a sudden, which have been kind of locked in to the Nextel only network, will have the full capability to roam seamlessly across the Sprint network and its 20+ million users. So it really is understanding the consumer historic place we've been on wireless, but the more business-oriented space we've been on long distance and making those work together. Yes, around the post there.
Yes, let me move from the bleachers to at least a grandstand here. Mr. Forsey, given your unique understanding of the strategy employed by the various telecommunication companies in Massachusetts, could you provide perhaps an evaluation, an overview of their strengths and perhaps the areas that they could do better in? And also, who do you see evolving as the dominant telecommunication player in Massachusetts? Thank you.
Wow. I should also recognize we have a table of my Sprint colleagues up front here, so I'll be sure to leave them in good shape here as I leave this afternoon. But I think this really is an incredibly exciting time for customers, and frankly, I think as all customers now look to understand, some of the points I made around technology and how it can be a better partner than in the past. I know a lot of business companies are scared that they've made big investments in legacy networks that are now going to have to be ripped out. And I think one of the things that we find ourselves advising customers on more and more is how to take advantage of those existing investments, but migrate over time in a smart way so that there's not a huge capital investment that's been stalled out. So I think the way the playing field is shaping up, and certainly you see that as Verizon and SBC see the need to change their model, become more integrated in the business space to be able to serve customers that travel and migrate around the world and across the country. They needed to have a bigger footprint, so you see SBC's acquisition of AT&T coming at it from that perspective. You see Verizon certainly trying to acquire MCI because of that perspective. And I think the whole point is the better companies can connect wireless and these fixed services together. Those companies in Massachusetts or in Kansas or Missouri or wherever are going to be more successful in serving customers. So you're going to see the cable companies, I think, make significant move into the wireless area, likely with partners, not likely to acquire that. I think that will occur, in the next couple of years as they get their legs under them in providing basic telephony services. You're going to see the regional bell operating companies, the Verizons and Sprint is actually doing this in our local business as well, start to try to get into the entertainment business by putting video and new services on their networks as those networks become more complete. So I think the real question will be, how will wireless companies that will be Sprint and Nextel, how will we compete with those other large companies that none of us have a complete soup-to-nut set of assets. We're all going to have to find our space that we compete in. And I think Sprint and Nextel will do very well for those customers that want to take advantage of that convergence. And again, we're keeping our long-distance network, bringing the power of the business applications from Nextel together, and we have the technology and the wireless spectrum to put in this fourth-generation network, which I think is really where the factors of capability come into play. And so I would expect, you're back around the post now, but I would expect Sprint and Nextel to be a very significant player in that regard. But we're going to have plenty of company. There's going to be more choices, which I think for customers, and by the way, more choices that are capable. I think in the past, because of regulatory changes, as AT&T saw its regulatory fate kind of move away from them in the last couple of years, they really did need a partner. So this is going to create a stronger company as a result of that. So I think for customers, this is generally viewed as good news, and you should expect there's going to be plenty of competition to step up to the plate on those converged services for you. I'm getting the timeout. Actually, I'm getting a different signal than that, so I have now used my time. Thank you, and I appreciate the invitation.